When did I first hear? I first heard about the Beatles when I was 7, I think. I heard them on the radio. Like, I didn't play radios. I didn't feel I was allowed to play rock and roll radio till I was 13. So all the little girls in my neighborhood went nuts. We all saw them on Ed Sullivan and everything. We all picked a favorite Beatle, and everybody liked Paul. Everybody liked Paul except a few outriders. We played a game called Beatle Daughters instead, because then we were the daughters of the different Beatles, which is still a deeply sexual relationship. It's just we play horsey, you know, instead of have sex. So I was always Paul's daughter, and Irene Prendergast was Ringo's daughter, and I don't know who the hell was George's daughter. Somebody was, though. And it was fun. I don't know what we did as Beatle daughters. We just sit around waiting for our fathers to come home, I think. We'd say, oh, I just, you know, oh, I can't wait till Paul comes home. Like, you know, it was so stupid. It was non-pelvic, though. You know, the Beatles could be pelvic or non-pelvic. You could take them pelvic or non-pelvic, whichever you preferred, you know. Yeah, we all bought out and bought all their stuff as soon as they came out. Every one of them, every one of them. The one that scared people was Magical Mystery Tour. I was like 11 when that came out, and I said, whoa! I was very frightened by the picture of George Harrison with the shovel full of spaghetti and Aunt Jessie, and it just scared me. It was too Lennon for me, right? I was scared by it, but I said, hang on, McCartney, just hang on, you know?
The theory is that everyone's a Beatle because the Beatles, they're 4 basic personality archetypes, and they're like the elements. John is fire, and Paul is water, George is air, and Ringo is earth. The magic of the Beatles is the way these 4 roads cross, and if you look at the 4 individual components, you realize that everybody's a Beatle. Everybody conforms to one or the other, or maybe a combination of those in lesser or greater degrees. Everybody is closer to one of those basic archetypal personalities that John, Paul, George, and Ringo are.
This all started in the proofreading department at Proskauer, Roth, Gethin, Mendelssohn, which we called Gonif at Momser, this law firm I used to work for. We worked in the proofreading department. This guy, Buddy Bacone, that I worked with, and I don't know how we just came up with it one day. We realized that the reason that the Beatles were so popular was that the basic division of human beings was Lennon's and McCartney's, and they clicked together like that yin and yang circle, like, well, Lennon's like a pointy-toed shoe, or an abstract painting, or a bad day at Black Rock, you know. And McCartney is like a round-toed shoe and a Peter Pan collar and White Christmas. It's like Mrs. Miniver versus Hiroshima Mon Amour, you know. It was like, you know, so it was the two things. Like Harrison comes off Lennon and Ringo comes off McCartney. Like Ringo's McCartney with a heart and Harrison is Lennon with a soul or something. But it just came to us one day. I don't remember how or when or why, but it made sense.
Oh, well, I'd have to say David Letterman is John.
I think Madonna is Paul McCartney.
Lucille Ball is more like Ringo because he's the funny one. I don't know.
Gandhi would be George Harrison.
Lennon was a monster, and I liked that about him because he always was what he was. I hated him sometimes. I don't know what he was. He was a pointy nose. He was just that voice, you know. I don't know what he was. He was that nose and those glasses and those teeth, you know. He was snarling. He was scary. He was good. He was a very full person, Lennon. And if he was an asshole, he was an asshole in front of everybody. He was an asshole in front of the world.
Well, John is the acerbic one, obviously, a fiery personality, somebody who's fiercely intelligent, and yet in some weird kind of a way the most incomplete person of the 4, someone who always had a kind of a hole in his heart and soul that needed to be filled, and it seems like his life was in quest of whatever it was that was going to plug that hole. It was the driving force that made him forge on as fearlessly as he did.
Paul McCartney was he was like a mannequin when he first came out. He was beautiful. You could trust him, especially if you're a little girl, you know, because you didn't want them to be too pelvic. You couldn't believe he was alive because his eyes were so large and his hair was so velvety and his lips were, oh, he was beautiful. He was dewy-faced and fresh-faced always and sweet. You know, you just loved him so much. You just loved him. He was so pure.
Paul McCartney, the cute one, A charmer, a guy who was very orchestrated about everything, who put together a great face. Paul also was, in some respects, one of the most uncompromising, maybe the most uncompromising personality of all of them. Paul McCartney is the Beatle we need to be most careful of because we can't be 100% sure of his motives.
Ringo was not a pain in the ass. That was the main thing about Ringo. He wasn't he just wasn't, he knew he wasn't there to be a pain in anyone's ass. He knew there were enough pains in the ass around. That's what it seemed to be. It always seemed like Ringo was shuttling between, you know, Madeira, Spain, and, you know, Los Angeles, you know, to tell John that Paul didn't mean that he shouldn't put a Kotex on his head in a nightclub or something. No, he shouldn't have, you know. So he was good, though, apparently. He was a go-between. He's sort of a mediator, Ringo. I don't know. It was a good thing he was there, you know. He kept the beat in more ways than one, you know. So the beat holds the band together. That's what I was told as a drummer.
Ringo Starr, Richie, fun-loving, affable, a star in his own right before he even met the Beatles, a guy who was very comfortable being in show business, happy-go-lucky, maybe ironic, semi-comic in a Chaplin-esque kind of a way. The most ordinary, straightest personality of all the Beatles, the guy who is much like the working-class Joe who just kind of stepped in something cool and ran with it.
George Harrison I liked him because even though he was very spiritual, he was still funny, and he smoked cigarettes all at the same time, which is good. He didn't try to shove his religion down anybody's throat, God knows, you know. And he had a sense of humor about himself, and about, you know, he liked to make fun of himself. I'm glad he was there. He was good. That Maharishi stuff was good for them, though. The little influx of sitar music. It didn't hurt them, you know.
George brings a restlessness, a spiritual curiosity, a sense that there are other greater values to connect with. George Harrison, the mystic, George Harrison, the soul of the Beatles, their spiritual heart and center. He's the first to really free his mind and look to greater things and not be so completely consumed with the worldly.
Frank Sinatra? Frank Sinatra?
Frank Sinatra would be a Ringo.
Frank Sinatra's a George.
I think it would be a John Lennon. Yeah.
I was gonna say Frank is more like Paul because they're more crooners.
Okay.
But that's just me. That's like a musical.
No, that makes sense.
That was what I was gonna say.
Frank Sinatra, what is he? He's a real bad Lennon-McCartney blend. That's people who are really in trouble, who have like them eating, you know, at them all the time. They're both in there, full size. I think that was his situation, don't you? There's a little Ringo in him, but not that. There was some Ringo in him, but it was mostly Lennon and McCartney were in there, boy. Whew.
In a way, it's like astrology, because you might have a George who also has, you know, a Moon and Paul or something like that, somebody who has the characteristics of one as a major trait and the characteristics of the other as a minor trait.
John is a problem Beatle to have if you have another Beatle in there, I think, because he's not going to put up with any bullshit. Now, if you have a Ringo in there with John, John doesn't care. John doesn't want to annoy Ringo, you know. And George, just McCartney will annoy John. And he'll be annoying McCartney constantly, making fun of him. You know, some people are just Lennons, some are just McCartneys, and that's it. But a lot of people are, you know, gradations of these things. That's where you get the rising Beatle or Beatles.
Ozzy Osbourne, I would say, is a Ringo.
Crosby, if Ringo and George could somehow breed a child, I think it would be somehow Ozzy Osbourne.
Ozzy Osbourne would be George Harrison.
Ozzy Osbourne, I don't know, he's a Ringo, I think. He's very kind. I like that. He has a battered kindliness to him.
Bill Clinton would be a Paul McCartney.
I think Bill Clinton's a little like Ringo too, though. Kind of a guy at the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place at the wrong time. Bill
Clinton is a McCartney, but he's aware of his inner Lennon, and his inner Lennon makes most of the decisions.
I'd say Elizabeth Taylor would be John.
I think Paul has a little bit of an ego, and I think she does too.
Oh, well, yeah, hello. How old was she when they were like, she's the most beautiful woman in the world ever?
Elizabeth Taylor, a McCartney-Ringo mix, I think. Because Elizabeth Taylor, of course, has to be incredibly vain because she's Elizabeth Taylor.
Gandhi. Well, then we go to Lennon again with his peace in and his being.
I would go with John on Gandhi.
Gandhi, yeah, Gandhi was a Harrison. That's so boring, but it's probably true. Did Gandhi have a sense of humor about himself? Was he self-deprecating? I didn't see the movie, so I don't know what the hell Gandhi's personality was like. Iceberg, McCartney, Romaine, Harrison, Mescaline, Lennon, of course. Mixed fields, greens, Ringo. Blue, McCartney. Red, Lennon. White, Harrison. Plaid, Ringo. Plaid, Ringo. Plaid. Yeah, like a loud plaid, you know, embarrassing, you know. Bay Area would probably be Harrison. Newark is Ringo. What do you have there? What do you have? Ringo is Newark. Lennon is in New York. I think. Yeah, because this city's just like, oh, please. You know, it just doesn't have time for that crap. It doesn't have time for crap. And I don't know about McCartney. What city is he?
Marilyn Monroe?
Tortured.
I was gonna say she's sort of tragic.
Brooding,
I guess.
lots of coilos.
I guess maybe more like George Harrison.
Okay.
She would be a Paul McCartney.
I think she was philosophical like George. We just didn't know it.
A very, you know, a sorry blend of, you know, but not a sorry blend, but like a sorry, she's like a mix of all four of them, kind of, you know what I mean? She had the crazed need of McCartney, you know, for approbation, you know. You know, she had the Lennon incisive intelligence to see what was going on, but she was sort of a nice guy sometimes, except she was so crazy that she couldn't be nice all the time. That was Ringo. And then, you know, she probably was, you know, she had some George in her because she was always yearning for something that wasn't, you know, beyond her reach. She figured, you know, there's some, it was just horrible. So, yeah, she's some kind of, like a hissing basket of Beatles, you know what I mean? Like adders, you know, twisting around each other, you know.
Pam Anderson would be a Ringo. Her left breast would be, would be a John, because I found that more calculating, and the right breast would be sort of a pre-65 McCartney.
Stop it. Pam Anderson, there's something going on in her background, but I think she's probably still a McCartney.
Paul McCartney.
Pamela Anderson looks like she'd be a Ringo, but then you see those tits and you go, that's a McCartney, because Ringo wouldn't go to the trouble, you know. He'd just be too much trouble for him.
Liberace's like Ringo's dad.
Liberace. Well, he's very flamboyant. I would say John Lennon for him, too.
Liberace, a McCartney, I think, you know, at first blush, maybe with a Ringo in him, you know, or a little Lennon, you know.
George W. Bush. I'd like to think he's not like any of them.
I don't know. George Bush is hard to categorize.
George W. Bush would get kicked out of the fucking Beatles.
I don't think you can even compare. Sorry, George Bush doesn't belong in the Beatles.
Yeah, Pete Best, maybe.
There were 6 people who can say they were a Beatle, and 4 made it and 2 didn't. And Pete Best was the one that got sacked because he was a Paul, and you couldn't have 2 Pauls.
The disturbing idea of a Best, you know, like a Pete Best. And I said, my God, there are Pete Bests, and they're always the worst. The Bests are always the worst. And they're out there floundering around, not knowing what the hell to do, right? My mother was an archetypal McCartney. Archetypal. She was so bad, she didn't even like music that much. My father was, I think, a Harrison, actually. But he came from a Lennon. He was a Lennon more, you know. He listened to music, and he was moody and everything. I'm such a McCartney, like I'm the archetypal because I come out of my mother, you know, and McCartneys have very wide meshes in them, you know, and like they're sifting material. I have both because I come from Lennon and McCartney, you know.
I think I'm a John Lennon.
My son, I think he's more of a George Harrison, actually, but somewhere in between those two.
It's okay.
I'm John. I don't know. I'd like to think I'm John, probably not though.
I want to be like George. But I don't know if I am.
I think he's a Lennon. Individual, got a lot to say. Maybe too much sometimes.
I think I'm happy being a McCartney. I don't want to be anybody else.
I'd say you're more of a George.
A George?
I think so, yeah.
I think we're going to have a fight now.
Yeah.
Who would you be if you're a Beatle? I don't know. I hate to say that, you know, because I'm not him.
You just know. You know in your heart what you are, you know. And if you're a Beatle that embarrasses you, you know, if you're embarrassed slightly by who you are, you know, you have to just get over yourself because, you know, that's who you're stuck being. So it's a good thing to know that, you know. Part of the Beatles' deal was, you know, you just have to be whatever the hell you are, you know.
And in the end, in the final analysis, I think Ringo was happy being a Ringo. George was happy being a George. Paul maybe wanted to be a John. And John didn't care.